I have seen over and over and over again over the past few months how having a group of engaged fans who are truly, supporting me, engaged in everything I do is what is propelling me forward.
Welcome to the Online Genius Podcast, where host and renegade thinking beer brewing lawyer turned online entrepreneur Bobby Klinck proves that building and protecting your online genius doesn't have to be rocket science. Bobby and his expert guests break down online marketing and the legal stuff so you can stop sweating the small stuff and get back to building your amazing business. Now, here's your host, Bobby Klinck.
Hey there. Welcome to episode 84 of the Online Genius Podcast. I'm your host, Bobby Klinck, and I am excited for today's episode because it's one of my favorite kind of episodes. What I'm going to be doing in this episode is doing a look back, right? I'm recording this in June, middle to late June, and it's going to come out the last week of June. So we are at the 6-month mark for 2019. And so I wanted to come in here and kind of do a review where things stand, where things are going, but more importantly, kind of talk about what I've learned, the things that I've learned and relearned over the last 6 months and how they're shaping what I'm going to be doing going forward in my business, because I think people can learn from these things like I did. Before we dive in, though, I wanted to start with kind of a brief recap. If you've been listening for a while, you'll remember back in December, I did a couple of episodes about my planning process. And my plan for the year was to really focus on legal templates. And I had different ways that I was intending to do things and to launch. And I was going to launch quarterly and it was going to grow each time. That was the plan. But like everything, things change. And so I'm going to share a little bit about that and kind of talk through why things have changed. And some of it, things happened and I had to make a decision to change like in the moment, and other things as I'm seeing trends in the industry. I've just decided to make changes. But I want to make the point that being willing to change, I think, is an important aspect that all entrepreneurs need to have. You cannot necessarily say, hey, I have this plan and I'm sticking to it no matter what. Now, you're going to have some plans, hopefully, that you will stick to. And obviously, once you move further along in your business and you really have your business model set, you'll change less. But early on, you're going to be changing a lot because the reality is that when you go out to market things, when you go out to launch things, you're going to try things, you're going to learn things, you're going to decide to make changes because the market is going to tell you that you need to make a change. So I want you to be ready for that and to make sure to be open to that prospect. But before we dive in, I want to remind you that this episode, as always, is brought to you by the Online Genius podcast community on Facebook. Again, I like coming to you with these episodes, whether it's me alone or with a guest, and I like to provide information and give you my insights and the things I'm learning. But really what I want to do is interact with you. I want to engage with you. I want to talk with you. I want to have conversations. I want to have a back and forth. And that's just not possible here on a podcast, right? I mean, I can talk, but you can't talk back to me. That's where the community comes in. It's a place where online entrepreneurs who are in this for the long term gather. We can talk about marketing. We can talk about the legal stuff. We can talk about beer if you want to. I don't really care, but the point is it gives us a chance to actually engage with each other and share and kind of connect. And so I'd love for you to join me. The community is absolutely free. It's a Facebook group, and you can join by heading to youronlinegenius.com/community. Again, youronlinegenius.com/community, and you can join me there in the Online Genius podcast community. So now I want to dive in, and I'm going to recap a little bit with what my plan was, and then I'm going to talk about kind of the 5 lessons I've learned over the last 6 months. Now, my plan was to build my business this year exclusively around the template library. And I say that I was going to have some, just normal templates I sell, my legal templates, the individual templates, but the only big product that I anticipated selling this year was my Online Genius template library, which is access to all of my templates. And my plan was to launch it once a quarter. And that was the goal. And in my mind, I had mapped out my plan that I was going to essentially kind of double each launch by rolling a lot of the profits back into Facebook ads to grow my list and then to grow each launch. That was the plan. And that was what I had in mind. That was going to be the cornerstone of my business, with some revenue coming in from individual template sales and then some affiliate launches I was planning to do. That was what I had in mind for the year. But I've had to change things, and I've changed things in a few different ways. One, my plans for the template library and the way I'm selling that have changed and will change even more going forward. But also I've decided to actually introduce a new product that has nothing to do with the legal stuff. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later in the episode, of kind of why I made that decision and how it came about, and give you that sense. But that's kind of a Cliff's Notes top-end version of how things are changing. Again, I'm going to be transparent with you. When I talked about, in my planning, I said that my big, hairy, audacious goal was to have $1 million in revenue this year. Kind of internally, my conservative goal was 750, with $1 million being my big, hairy, audacious goal. And that was based upon last year, my revenue was about $250,000. So I said, hey, if I could triple my revenue, that's pretty good. If I could quadruple it, that's really good. At the end of the first quarter, I was on track with the revenue from all my businesses for like $768,000 in revenue. I'd done that very precise. I have not had time to do that level of precision at this point, but as I'm recording this, I appear from my calculations to be on pace for about a $700,000 year in revenue. So I'm a bit below where I wanted to be, but my hope is obviously that the curve is going to kind of increase. So that should get me to the 750 and hopefully get me up to that million. So I'm still there. But me saying that, I have to tell and give the caveat. My goal was for my online business, and that revenue number I'm giving you is not just for my online business. And that's going to lead me into the first lesson I've learned over the last 6 months. And again, I say it's the first lesson I've learned, but it's a lesson that I've learned many times, but I was forced to relearn it over the last 6 months. And that's that life is going to throw you some curveballs. In other words, you can have a great plan all you want, and you should try to execute it, but you're going to get into it and things are going to happen. And in my case, those things that happened, that made a big change in the way I've had to approach the year so far, was that I had planned essentially that this year was going to be almost exclusively about my online business, and that my law firm, I had one little matter that I was going to kind of finish out, and that was it. Well, on January 5th, I think it was, we got a letter that basically meant I had to ramp up my law firm on an old matter, an old case that I'd handled, but I had to come back and finish it out. And so I've been spending a considerable amount of time on that this year, and it's going to continue until about September. That's when it should wrap up. But the result is I have not been able to give the focus to my online business that I had hoped and anticipated I would be able to. Now, I've given a lot, and I'm still continuing to give a lot, but I've had to spend time in my law firm business, which I didn't anticipate. And so I share that because I want to be clear that the revenue numbers I'm giving you now include my law firm and my online business. Now, still, most of the revenue is from my online business, but a big chunk is in the law firm business. But I think that's a fair way to look at it, because realistically, that law firm business is harder to get. And what I mean by that is it is not something that's scalable. It is something where I'm trading hours for dollars. So I believe that once I'm able to stop focusing on that and put essentially 100% of my time into the online business, it should accelerate things. So I should be able to move better. But what I want to point out there is that I could have been mad about it. I could have gotten upset about it. I could have, huffed and puffed and been annoyed by it, but I didn't. I rolled with it. I said, okay, it is what it is. And I'm going to do both of these things at the same time. And I'm going to continue to build my online business. I'm not simply going to shelve it. Now, I understand there may be a time potentially where in your business you might have to, but my hope is that you won't get to that point. But the idea is that you do have to have some flexibility and be willing to roll with the punches, to make changes, to find things, find solutions that will allow you to do both, et cetera. And so that is an important thing for, I think, everyone to keep in mind. Entrepreneurship is hard. It's advanced work. People, think sometimes that it's easy. It's not. Life is going to throw you curveballs, especially once you start your business. And so be ready to roll with the punches. So that's kind of one of the first lessons I learned this year. And again, like I said, it's a lesson we all should know, but I had to relearn it. The next lesson is one that actually I think I knew conceptually, but somehow I wasn't applying it to my business and the online business. And that lesson is that simple is always better than complicated. You could call it Occam's razor, where, the old scientific principle, between multiple solutions or multiple explanations, you generally are going to take the simpler one. Well, the same is true for business. And what I mean by that is that a lot of times we as entrepreneurs like to make things complicated. And we do it because we've learned all of these things. And so we say, hey, we've learned all these things. I want to put them into action. And so you will see people who have some of the most convoluted marketing plans with 18 upsells and 3 downsells and a follow-on membership and then a downsell membership and a group coaching program and a mastermind, and it makes your head spin. And they're doing this because they've learned all these tactics and they've learned about all of these things. The reality is that going that route is hardly ever right. We are all always leaving money on the table, and we need to accept that. And what I mean by that is there is always another offer we could make, and maybe we could make money from it. The problem is that when you complicate things and go to try to get that money that might be that you're leaving on the table now, you're going to end up sacrificing something somewhere else. And so a lot of people end up chasing all of these different things. And so they get so fragmented that they're not able to put the right amount of focus onto any one thing. I am a big believer that until you are to the 7 figures and probably multiple 7 figures level, you really need to be focused on only a handful of offers in your business. And again, I'm not talking about if you have some like little things that just, sell on their own, like $7 ebooks or $17 ebooks. That stuff I don't care about. I'm talking about courses, memberships, major products. And I think if you're going to have multiple of them, if you're going to have a bunch of them, they need to be in a logical sequence. But at the same time, don't create a sequence just because of it. Now, maybe you've heard of the value ladder concept where, this is the idea that you want to have a free product and a very cheap product and maybe a $97 product and a $497 product and a $2,000 product, then a $6,000 group coaching program, and then a mastermind or something like that. You'll see those kinds of value ladders talked about. And ideally, maybe you'll get there. But I just want you to ask yourself, do you have the bandwidth to deal with all of that? Chances are you don't. And until you have a huge audience and a huge number of people coming in, say, thousands of people coming in on your cheap product, your low-end product, you probably don't have a need for all of those different levels. And so I would commend you to think that through. But it's not just in the product mix. And that's not where I learned the lesson, right? Because I didn't have a bunch of different products at a bunch of different price points. That was not my problem. My problem was in another area, which was that I was complicating how I was selling my product. And I've talked about this before in my episode about my non-launch launch. So back in January, I decided, I was going to do my first launch of my template library. And I was going by conventional wisdom that I was going to have a webinar with all of that stuff and everything that goes with the webinar and then the promo sequence and all of that stuff, including ads and everything. And when I did that, I dealt with problems because I was putting all of these checkpoints that people had to get to before they could buy my product. And guess what? Sometimes that works. In some contexts, you want that because you need to make sure that the people are qualified. But in my case, it wasn't the best approach because the problem is, let's be honest, there aren't a lot of people who want to go to a webinar or masterclass or whatever you want to call it about the legal stuff. It's not something fun. And so having a webinar as the way I was selling the product was not a productive way to do it. I was paying, on average, I think $25 to get someone to sign up for my webinar using Facebook ads. And that was very expensive. I made money on it. I still was making, I think, something like $50 per person who signed up. But still, paying $25 to get someone in is an expensive way to do it. And so it was a learning experience. And then the counterexample to that was what happened in March when I did a non-launch launch where I literally just emailed my list and emailed people on my wait list and did this over a 3-day period. I think I sent 6 or 7 emails total, and I made more money. I made more money without spending $1 on ads, without complicating, without doing anything else. And again, that may or may not apply to your business. It may be that you need to do a challenge or a webinar or a video series or something in a launch. If you're selling a course or a membership, you probably do. But what I'm going to tell you is that I want you to be open to the concept that maybe you can make it simpler. And maybe making it simpler is the way to go. And so be willing to try those things and see where things happen. And again, often it's going to come through, analyzing what's happening in your launch and what's going on and thinking through those things, because you're going to see where people drop off. You're going to see where you're kind of outside the norms of industry averages. And then from there, you can make decisions. And so again, I was able to see it because I was paying way too much to get people into a webinar, and then the attendance rate wasn't, great. It wasn't any worse than average. But you could kind of see in my case, maybe that's not the way to go. So that I want to commend to you. Simpler is better. And I was reminded of it. I can't even remember what I bought, but I bought some product recently. And it was one of those things that after I bought it, I almost wished I hadn't, because it made me go through one of those series that was actually popularized by our friends over at ClickFunnels, where literally there were like 4 upsell attempts in a row. So I hit, yes, I want this, buy. And then it takes me to a page. Well, do you want this thing? And I had to scroll all the way down and say no. And then it was another one. I had to scroll all the way down and say no. And then I went to another one. And I had to scroll all the way down and say no. And I think there was a 4th one. I had to scroll all the way down and say no. And I'm just going to tell you, for some products, that's okay, right? Because they'd already gotten my money, right? That was a software package of some sort. But if you do that to people in a course or a membership where you need to kind of continue to build goodwill with them and connect with them, I'm a believer that's going to be counterproductive. So I'm going to tell you that kind of sales funnel is not a good thing to use. I will argue that. I'll gladly have a discussion with anyone. But I honestly believe if you're doing that, you're doing a disservice to your business. You should have one main offer and maybe one upsell. And if you want to have one upsell that makes sense, feel free. There's no problem with that. But again, in the case I just went through, literally these upsells half the time were more expensive than the product I just bought. And I said, no, I don't want that. So keep it simple. Don't overcomplicate things. Now, the next lesson I've learned is one that I keep talking about because I think it's important, and it's kind of related to what I just talked about with simpler is better, or kind of in some ways. I have seen this trend that launching seems to be getting harder and harder. I keep hearing entrepreneurs talking about how their launches fail. And I've seen it a lot with newer entrepreneurs in my role as an ambassador in a course or in Facebook groups where I'm seeing people talk about launching and they're having no success. And so those are the people who have no following. And I've seen a lot of that, and that has been an issue. But I've even seen it in discussions I've had with entrepreneurs who are further along, with entrepreneurs who are at the multiple 6 and sometimes even up in the 7-figure levels. What I am finding, and again, I can't say this is true of all spaces, but I can definitely say it's true if you are marketing to other people in the online space. But even people outside of that, I'm hearing a little bit of it. What I'm hearing is that it is getting harder and harder to get cold traffic and cold audiences to come into a launch and convert. And by cold, I mean literally people who don't know you. Now, there are many places where you could have a warm audience. Maybe it's your email list. Maybe it's your social media following. I have a good friend, Tiffany Lee Bymaster, who I had on the podcast recently to talk about live video. You know, her work is predominantly done through social media and live video. And so she markets to those people, to her warm audience there. But what I'm hearing from a lot of people is when they try to go out and just target, let's say it's a lookalike audience with Facebook ads, or it's, people who are interested in related products on Facebook ads. When they're trying to do those kinds of Facebook advertising into a launch, it is very tough sledding. And, you'll hear people talk about, so you'll hear, the people who do challenges and love challenges talk about how it's a problem with webinars, and you'll hear people doing webinars talk about how it's a problem with everyone, and you'll hear people doing the video series talking about everything being a problem, and it's kind of everything. But what I'm hearing is largely that costs are going up, it's getting harder. And again, I want to stress this. You hear a lot of statistics thrown around and a lot of people talking about cost per lead and things like that. And anytime I've heard those costs per lead that people talk about generally, and then I'm actually doing it, and a lot of times you then talk to like a Facebook ads person, they're like, well, no, what you're paying right now is normal. And what I mean by that is right now I'm paying about $4 a lead, not for a launch, just to get people onto my list. And that's literally giving people my privacy policy template for free. It's costing me $4 to get someone to sign up for that. Well, if you listen to a lot of the advice that you've heard, I mean, there were people who were saying you should be able to get leads for $1 and $2. And there are still spaces where you can do that. I want to be clear. There are definitely places, especially in the consumer-facing world, where you can get leads more cheaply. Although what I've heard is in that industry, it's much harder to convert them to buyers. But again, I'm saying you hear these $4 leads, and to a lot of people, that seems like a very expensive lead. And I will tell you, it is much more expensive than I was paying 2 years ago. 2 years ago, I was routinely getting people onto my list for $2 a lead, and I wasn't even giving them something as valuable as my privacy policy template. So I share that with you so that you understand, I believe the trend, and everything I've heard from Facebook experts, et cetera, is that this is right. The trend is it is getting more and more expensive generally to advertise on Facebook. And on top of that, everything I'm hearing is that launching is even harder on top of that. I've heard many entrepreneurs going through what's called the launch free fall, where they're having horrible problems, or they're not getting people onto their webinar that they want, et cetera. And again, it depends on what level you're at, right? For some people, launch free fall is making no sales. For people who with multiple six figures, launch free fall is if you're not going to hit $50,000 on a launch, that's a problem. And so, but I'm hearing it on all sides, and the messages I'm hearing from everybody seems to be the same. And that is launching is getting harder. And the people who are having blockbuster launches and who are doing things that are working great that I'm hearing from consistently, one of the other themes I'm hearing from those people is, this consistent drumbeat, their success is largely coming from their list, from affiliates, from people that follow their Facebook page, and that they do lives every week for a year before they're launching. And those people are having success and are doing great things. But that is not launching to cold traffic. And so I'm just, wanted to kind of convey this, that I've been hearing this issue that launching is getting harder. And again, it's kind of been, consistent theme that I've heard from a lot of the peers that I talk to. So that's kind of the third lesson that I've learned. The fourth lesson is hard to put into words other than to say that this year I have truly come around to the power of mindset, of the woo, of being aligned. I like to say I'm a recovering blockhead, and I continue to recover more and more and more. And it's been through the help of the mastermind I'm in with James Wedmore's Inner Circle, where, we do a lot of that work. And before that, I had never done that kind of work, candidly. And I'll tell you that I am finding that things are happening more and more where I realize that my mindset, my mental baggage, things like that are in the way. And some of it's little, but I've realized I have these mental blocks. And so some of the mental blocks that I've recognized this year that I didn't realize before was one about myself, about me working too much. I realized that I am a workaholic, and that stemmed from a mental baggage I was carrying. And I think I've talked about this before on one of these episodes. I think it was with Dr. Shannon Urban. But what I've discovered is that my workaholic nature was stemming from guilt. It was guilt because I made a decision almost a decade ago, but I made a decision to leave a very comfortable legal world, meaning the white shoe law firm, where if I had stayed in that environment, I would have easily been making $500,000 to $1 million every year for the last 5 years, and it would have been safe and it would have been comfortable. And so I recognized this year, and it took me time and work this year to recognize this, but I recognized that I was feeling guilty about that. And so I was working a ton to try to justify to myself more than anything else, but to justify, see, it's not because I'm lazy. I'm working. I'm still working. And so that was something that took me a while to realize. And so I would challenge you to realize that you have mental baggage too, and try to find where those things are that you're doing that are sabotaging you. But even more recently, one of the things that I have resisted and that has been one of my big holdups is hiring a team. And most people who know me in the space talk about how one of my superpowers is that I get stuff done. I have an idea and I move to execution in lightning time. And that's generally true. I mean, I will go from an idea to launching a product in a couple of weeks or less sometimes. But I will do those things in almost every aspect of my business. And I will take advice where, my coach says, hey, I think you're making it too complicated. You ought to simplify it. Maybe I resist for a day or two, but then I take a look, I see the numbers, I'm like, okay, and I do it. But my team and building a team was something where I just hadn't been able to get over it. And, when I did some work, I recognized this literally within the last couple of weeks. I've recognized this piece that really it stems from kind of mental baggage again. And it was in my law firm, I had hired someone. I'm trying to remember, it's probably been 5 years ago or so. And she was wonderful. She was a great associate attorney working for me. But then when I kind of decided to shift my business, I had to let her go. And it wasn't because she wasn't good. It was because I decided to make a change. And that conversation is still one of the most painful I've ever had to have. Because letting someone go is, I think, going to be one of the most painful discussions you're ever going to have, one of the most painful things you ever have to do. And especially in that context, where it wasn't that she had done anything wrong. I mean, I just, there were decisions that were kind of being made. And so I, had to let her go. And so I finally realized that the pain and guilt that I was carrying about that was what was stopping me from taking action. And I talked through it with my coach and I worked through it. And, so that was something that I kind of recognized. And it's kind of funny because, again, this tends to show with me, it is, I get something out in my head. If I fix the mental baggage, the problem is solved. And so what I mean is earlier this June, basically, at my mastermind retreat, the first week of June is when I finally worked through this. And I'm now in the final stages of hiring my first full-time team member. So in a matter of like 2 weeks or so, 2.5 weeks, where last week I was in New Jersey for my law firm with deposition work. So I didn't have a lot of time then, but still in 2.5 weeks, I went from that to committing and getting it done. And so I encourage you with that because I want you to understand that you have mental baggage too. And you need to search through it, figure out what your mental baggage is. What are your hangups? What are you not doing because you're telling yourself stories in your mind or because emotions are getting in your way? And how are those things preventing you from actually doing what you need to do? And so I encourage you to do that work, do the mental work, because that is the most important work, candidly, that you need to be doing as an entrepreneur, as a person, et cetera. But I want to talk a little bit more about mindset because there's another issue. And in next week's episode, you're going to hear it where we're talking about this. One of the members of my mastermind does energy healing, but she also helps people get in alignment. And she and I were talking because since our first retreat, in a sense, and really it was in the March timeframe, all of a sudden, everything has kind of fallen into line with me. And as she put it, I'm in a flow state. And when we were talking about it, and you'll hear a lot more about it next week, literally, I was laughing as I was doing this interview because she was talking about things, not knowing that she was essentially describing changes that I had made and things I had done over the last couple of months. But literally, these kinds of mindset issues and deciding to get over stuff and to give myself space and those kinds of things made a huge change in my business. And so I'm not going to spoil next week's episode because it is a great one, but I want you to listen to it because I think it's going to help maybe some of you get past your mental baggage issues that you're dealing with. So that's the fourth lesson is the power of mindset and the power of doing the mental work. If you're not doing the mindset work, you need to be doing the mindset work. It is as important, if not more important, than the other work you're doing in your business. So you need to make sure you're doing it. So that then takes me to the last lesson I've learned this year. And it really is, I say that I've probably learned some other lessons, but this is the last one I'm going to talk about. And it really is the culmination of a lot of these other lessons that I've talked about. And what I've learned this year is that the power of my business is in my list and the fans that I have cultivated over the last 18 months. And what I mean by that is that I have seen over and over and over again over the past few months how having a group of engaged fans who are, truly, supporting me, engaged in everything I do is what is propelling me forward. So I talked about it in episode 79, where I talked about kind of the power of human connection, about the power of doing those things and why it's so important. And I don't want to reiterate all of that here, but what I'll say is that I have discovered that building those connections has been the most important work I have done over the last 18 months. I had people buy my template library in March who had been on my list since last April and had never bought a thing from me. But I had nurtured them for a year. I had treated them right for a year. They had seen me giving and serving and doing all the right things for a year. And so they bought from me. And so that was one example. And again, that March non-launch launch. So I did this email only launch of my template library in the last week of March. That was kind of the seminal moment when I first started to see these things. Because again, a couple of things had happened before that. I'd had multiple people reach out to me asking when I was going to open the doors. And that was the first time that had happened to me. So it was a sign to me that I was starting to build the momentum. And so that was part of it because that was a piece that I was seeing that really mattered. So that was a big piece. But also I do this email only launch and I made, I think, $58,000 or $60,000. I don't remember the exact number, but $58,000 or $60,000 in sales, just emailing my list and going on to Facebook and my Facebook group. And even that, I don't even remember if I did it much in my Facebook group, but I didn't do much else. I didn't do Facebook ads. I didn't promote it heavily. It was primarily just talking to the people who were already in my community. That's where that money came from. And so that realization was huge for me. And then it was reiterated. I think I mentioned at the beginning of this episode or earlier in this episode that part of my pivot has been to introduce a new product. And what came to me was the same thing that inspired me to do episode 79, where I talked about the power of human connection, which was a message from my friend Tarzan K, inspired me to create a new product, to create a product that was about helping other people kind of cultivate the same kind of following, the same kind of connection with their fans. And I, again, in typical Bobby fashion, I got that message from Tarzan. I joined Stu McLaren's tribe. And then like a week later, I sent an email to my list, and first just to people who had bought my signature template library before, who had access to it, and then to everybody. But I sent this email to people that essentially said, here's my idea. And at the time I was calling it, I think I said it was going to be the True Fans membership, and it was based on the concept of the 1,000 true fans. If you know that concept from I'm blanking on his name, but he is the executive. He was the executive editor of Wired magazine. And the idea is that in the online world, all you need is 1,000 true fans. So it was a riff on that. And I sent an email or a couple emails, and it was literally just, here's my vision. And it was nothing more than that, because I didn't have anything more than that. And I got 45 people to sign up as founding members, to basically pay me multiple hundreds of dollars based purely upon my description that this is an idea and a vision I have. And a lot of those people responded and said, look, I don't know exactly what this is, but if you're doing it, I want in. And those are the people who are driving my business. The reality is there were a lot of people, and if you have a following, if you have people who follow you, maybe you've already gotten this sense. But there were, some people that I knew immediately. And I said, before I launched this thing, I said, I bet you they're going to sign up. And sure enough, they did. Because again, I had seen that they were people who supported me. And I want to be very clear when I say this. I'm not going to say any names, but some of them will know I'm talking about them. One of those people was someone who had been on my list since last April and had never bought anything from me until March. But I had a feeling she was going to be someone who would come along with me. And so that launch reiterated this belief that I had, that I could tell people, I have this vision. I'm going to launch this thing about a month from now. I would like you to sign up. And they did. And it's not about me being great at things. The messaging in that thing wasn't particularly great. I didn't do a lot of the kind of ninja messaging tricks that a lot of better marketers are able to do with things like thought reversals and all that stuff. No, I didn't do that. I just, kind of laid it out there. And because I had cultivated my fans and my list, I got that support. So I'm going to commend you that whatever your business is, whatever you're doing, and you're going to hear me keep talking about this, the most important thing you can be doing in your business is cultivating a relationship and connections with your true fans. And so that needs to be among your top priorities. And your true fans includes people who've never bought from you, people who've bought from you, and people who've bought everything you've got. But you need to be cultivating those people from day one, and you need to focus on that. And if you do, your business will be set up for the long haul. So that's kind of the lesson that I've learned again, and it's been reiterated to me. And I've talked about it many times. My list outperforms other people's lists. And I think it's because I'm doing that work and I'm over delivering. So I want to just kind of commend that to you as a lesson that I think you could all take away from this. So those are the big lessons. Now I want to talk about what my plan is going forward, because again, this is a look back, and it's kind of, in a sense, I'm revising my plan. I'm going through, figuring out what are my rocks and my vision and all of those things for my business. So I'm going to share some of that with you. My plan going forward is, again, I want to be clear. Chances are this is going to change, but this is my plan. Number one, my products, I'm going to have two signature products. I'm going to have my legal signature product, the template library, what I already had. And then I'm going to have the membership site, which is no longer called the True Fan. It's called the Fans First Society. And my theory behind it, that name, is that the first thing we need, or, that what we need to do is find our fans first. In other words, before we do anything else. And second, once we find them, we need to put our fans first. So that's the idea behind the name. But so those are the two products that I'm currently offering and intend to offer for the foreseeable future. And a couple of things that I'm going to change about that. One, the template library, I'm no longer going to do a traditional launch. Those are always going to be non-launch launches going forward, because I just don't think people want to go to a webinar about the legal stuff. Now, if you're listening to this and you're saying, no, you're crazy, Bobby, I would love to come to a webinar about the legal stuff, you know how to find me, email me, send me a message on social media. I'd love to hear it, but I just don't think people want that. And so I'm going to be doing it differently. But more importantly, that I'm going to put a little bit of evergreening into, partly because I don't anticipate launching that quarterly anymore. I think I anticipate from now on, I'm going to launch that twice a year. So the doors will only be open twice a year generally. but I'm going to give people who sign up for my list and go through some things a chance, like a very short window specific to them, evergreen to them, that they can buy it for that limited period. So I haven't set that up yet, but I'm going to set that up. Right now, I anticipate my next launch of that will be my last launch of that of 2019. That's going to be either in late July or early August, depending on kind of timing, but I will have one more launch of that this year. Then beyond that, it's the Fans First Society, and that's where I'm going to put a lot of effort. So as I'm recording this, I've just opened the actual doors for the founding members to start it, and I'm, currently, as this is being released until the end of this week, basically until June 30th, I'm running a $1 trial. Basically, people can try it out for 2 weeks for $1 if they're interested. If you're interested in that, you can just go to youronlinegenius.com/fans first. You can find out the details. But I'm offering that, and then I'm going to close the doors, and I'm not going to be selling it come July 1st until sometime in the fourth quarter. I will do my first proper launch of the Fans First Society in the fourth quarter. And though that I anticipate I'm going to do a launch. I haven't figured out exactly how I'm going to launch it, but I will be launching it in a traditional launch format because I think that's something that I can, deliver a lot of value that people will enjoy getting even if they don't sign up. And that's always one of the things I like to say. If I'm going to do a launch, I want it to be, whether it's a challenge, a webinar, a video series, whatever it is, I want to be able to deliver a ton of value to people so that no matter what, whether they sign up or not, they got a ton of value out of the experience. That's part of my mentality of serving people. And so I want to make sure that I can do that. And I think I can do that with the Fans First Society product. So I'm going to be doing that in the fourth quarter. I have to figure out the details. That's one of my rocks for the next quarter, for the third quarter, is to figure that out and map it all out. So I'm going to be working on that. And so those are kind of what I'm going to be doing. And I think my plan going forward is going to be to launch each of those products, so the template library with my just email-only launches twice a year, and the same thing with the Fans First Society, launching that twice a year, kind of in alternating quarters, if you will. So I will have a launch first, second, third, and fourth quarter of each year, but it will alternate between the two products. So that's my product plan going forward. In addition to that, I want to talk about building my team because I think this is an important thing to talk about. And I talked about how I've moved in this, and I am making a move, and I will be hiring someone. My goal is to have a person start on July 1st, which happens to be a Monday. So I'm doing it a bit differently. A lot of people that I know try to go straight to an integrator. If you've read the book Rocket Fuel or Traction, you've heard about this concept of the visionary and the integrator. And so I know a lot of people who are going there. I don't think that's the way to go. My view is that, quite honestly, right now, I don't need an integrator. Because what are they going to be integrating? Me? I mean, there's nothing to be integrated yet. I am a believer that you need to set up kind of structures and figure out what you need. But what I need most is someone to help me with the marketing and sales function. So think about it as growing the downloads of this podcast, coming up with ideas to market the podcast, with my social media, coming up with ideas on social media events, etc., helping me with email list building and figuring out email sequences. I mean, I'm not going to give all that away, but having someone help me with it would be helpful. But also then having someone who can help me with my evergreen funnels that I'm developing for the template library. That will be useful to have someone who is kind of there and can manage like split testing and just monitor emails and see open rates and see and things like that I can't do candidly. I just don't have time to be monitoring all that stuff. And then also in setting up launches. So that's the kind of stuff I need help with. And that is all over in one area of the business, which is the growth team, if you will, which is the sales and marketing team. So that's what I'm looking to build out first. And I anticipate after that hire, because I've written my kind of goals for the end of the year, I want to have 2 people on board, that person. And then I'm going to have someone, my next hire will be someone on the fulfillment side. In other words, someone to help me with customer support, to help me with community management, and then to help me with kind of, creating content for for customers, not the podcast, but for example, in my Fans First Society, there is monthly training. So having someone who helps wrangle me and helps with that process would be helpful. And if I decide that I want to come out with new whatever products of any kind, it would be helpful to have that person in place. So that will be my next hire. So my goal by the end of the year is to have 2 employees. These are local employees in the Washington, D.C. area because I like to talk. I don't want to have to do this all virtually. So I like to actually be able to talk with people and get coffee periodically. So they will be local folks. So that's what I'm doing by the end of this year. That is my goal. Like I said, one of them will be hired and my plan is to start by July 1st. And then I anticipate in the fourth quarter is when I will probably bring someone on to help me with the fulfillment side. So that's my team plan. And those are the big parts of my component kind of that I'm thinking about now. There are other things I have to work on over the next year that aren't really about plan, but are things that I have to figure out. For example, I've been known as the legal guy, and now I have to figure out my messaging because I'm now stepping into a non-legal role and helping people with the business side. And so I need to figure out how to have that cohesive messaging, which I'm working on at the moment. So that's kind of some of the things that are going on in the background as well. But I'll stop for now. But those are, that's an overview of what I've got going on these days. I'd love your feedback. I'd love to know what's going on in your business. And I'd love to hear, what your plans are. And if you have feedback, if there are things that I said that you say, no, Bobby, you're crazy. I want to hear from you. And the best place to do that is in the community. That's why I tout it at the beginning of every episode. That's why I say every episode is brought to you by the community. Again, I don't want this podcast to be about me marketing to you to buy stuff from me. Now, I'm going to talk about things I have like the template library, and I'm going to talk about the Fans First Society, but my primary goal is to be able to actually just have a conversation with you. So if you're not yet in the Online Genius podcast community, I would love for you to join me. Again, do that at youronlinegenius.com/community. You can join there. And if you're already in the community, I'd love for you to give me feedback on these episodes. Let me know what you're thinking. And also, if you have ideas, things you would like me to cover in the podcast, drop those in the community too, because I'd love to see that as well. I mean, I have my idea for my content, but I want to serve you. And so if there are things that you would like me to talk about, I'd love to hear those and see those in the community. You can also email me, but the quickest way is put it in the community. That way other people can see it, maybe can agree or disagree and let me know what their general feedback is. So I'd encourage you to do that. Also, if you haven't yet, please leave a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps other people discover, and I would appreciate it. And then you can also obviously DM me on Instagram. I'm just Bobby Klinck on Instagram, and I'd love to hear from you there as well. But that's it for this episode of the Online Genius Podcast. I'll be back next week, and next week is an interview where, again, we're going to talk about getting in a flow state and really being aligned with what you're doing in your business. And so I hope you'll come back next week. It is a great episode. But that's it for now. I'll talk to you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Online Genius Podcast. Make sure to tune in next week for more great tips, tricks, and strategies to help you build and protect your online genius.